and then we'll get right into it. Ooh, too loud. Good thing I checked. Test, 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 test. That should be all right. Yeah, that's perfect. Okay. Let's get going. Thank you for tolerating that. Always have to have a little bit of that at the beginning of the show because it's hard to get the stuff right. Just exactly so. So we're actually outside of Greymore, sitting on a hill, and we're going to watch the sunset and then the sun come back up again. But while we're doing so, we're going to read through some Daggerfall books. And the first one we're going to read is, unfortunately, The Brief History of the Empire, Part 1. And I say unfortunately because it can be a little bit dry. So relax, sit back, listen, learn some stuff, and enjoy your day. I will be your bard, and I will be getting into character right now. Before the day of Tiber Septim, all Tamriel was chaos. The poet Tressasis called that era the days and nights of blood and venom. The kings were a petty lot of grasping tyrants who fought Tiber's attempts to bring order to the land. But they were as disorganized as they were dissolute, and the strong hand of Septim brought peace forcibly to Tamriel. The year was Second Era, 896. The following year, the Emperor declared the beginning of a new era. So we began the Third Era, year Aught. For 38 years, the Emperor Tiber reigned, a just, pious, and glorious age, when justice was known to one and all, from serf to king. It reigned for a fortnight after, as if the land of Tamriel itself was weeping. The emperor's eldest living son, Pelagius, came to the throne. Though his reign was short, he was as strong and resolute as his father had been, and we could have enjoyed a continuation of the Golden Age. Alas, an unknown enemy of the Septims hired the cursed organization of cutthroats, the Dark Brotherhood, to kill the Emperor Pelagius I as he knelt in prayer at the Temple of the One in Imperial City. Pelagius's first reign lasted less than 3 years. Pelagius had no living children, so the crown of the empire passed to his first cousin, the daughter of Tiber's brother, Agnerith. So did Kintyra, former queen of Silvanar, assume the throne. Kintyra I was blessed with a time of prosperity and good harvests, and was an avid patroness of art, music, and dance. Kintyra's son was crowned after her death, the first emperor of Tamriel to use the imperial name, Uriel. The Emperor Uriel I was the great lawmaker of the Septim dynasty, and a promoter of independent organizations and guards and guilds. Under his kind hand, the Fighters Guild and the Mages Guild increased in prominence throughout Tamriel. His son Uriel II reigned for 18 years, from the death of Uriel I in Third Era 64 to Third Era 82. Tragically, the rule of Uriel II was cursed with blights, plagues, and insurrections. His tender-heartedness inherited from his father did not serve Tamriel well, and little justice was done. Pelagius II inherited not only the throne from his father, but the debt from the poor financial and judicial management. Pelagius dismissed all of the old elder council and only allowed those willing to pay great sums to return. He encouraged similar acts of his vassals, the kings of Tamriel, and by the end of his 17-year reign, Tamriel had returned to prosperity. His critics, however, had suggested that any advisor of wisdom, but without gold, had been forcibly ousted. This may have led to some of the troubles his son Antiochus faced when he became emperor. Antiochus was certainly one of the most flamboyant of the usually austere Septim family. He had many mistresses, and nearly as many wives, and was renowned for his grandness of dress and good humor. Unfortunately, his reign was rife with civil wars, surpassing even that of his grandfather Uriel II. The War of the Isle in 3rd Era 110, 12 years after Antiochus assumed the throne, nearly took the province of Somerset Isle away from Tamriel. The united alliance of the kings of Somerset and Antiochus only managed to defeat King Orgnum of the island kingdom of Pyandonia due to a freak storm. Legend credits the Sigic Order and the Isle of Artaeum with the magic behind the storm. The story of Kintyra II, heiress of her father's throne, is certainly one of the saddest tales in modern history. Her first cousin Uriel, son of Queen Potema of Solitude, accused Kintyra of being a bastard, alluding to the famous decadence of the imperial city during her father's reign. When this accusation failed to stop her coronation, Uriel bought the support of several disgruntled kings of High Rock, Skyrim, and Morrowind, and, with Queen Potema's assistance, coordinated 3 attacks on the Septim Empire. The first attack occurred in the Iliac Bay that separates High Rock and Hammerfell. Kintyra's entourage was destroyed and the Empress was taken captive. For 2 years, Kintyra II languished in an imperial prison, believed to be somewhere in Glen Point or Glenmoril Weird, before she was slain in her cell. The second attack was on a series of imperial garrisons along the coastal Morrowind Islands. The Empress consort, Contin Arinx, died defending the forts. The third attack was a siege of the imperial city itself, occurring after the Elder Council had divided the army to attack western High Rock and eastern Morrowind. The much weakened government had little defense against Uriel's attack and surrendered after only a fortnight of resistance. Uriel took the throne that night and proclaimed himself Uriel III, Emperor of Tamriel. The year was 3rd Era 121. Thus begins the War of the Red Diamond, described in Volume 2 of this series. Hello, Jemima. Nice to see you. Always so kind. On we go. Part 2, The Brief History of the Empire. Uriel III not only proclaimed himself Emperor of Tamriel, but also proclaimed himself Uriel Septim III, taking a surname as the title. In truth, his surname was Uriel Mantiarco from his father. In time, Uriel III was deposed and his crimes reviled, but the tradition of taking the name Septim for a title for the Emperor of Tamriel did not die with him. For 6 years, the War of the Red Diamond tore apart the empire. The combatants were the 3 surviving children of Pelagius II, Potema, Sepphoris, and Magnus, and their offspring. Potema, of course, supported her son Uriel III, and had the support of all Skyrim and northern Morrowind. With the efforts of Sepphoris and Magnus, High Rock turned Hammerfell, Somerset Isle, Valenwood, Elsewhere, and Blackmarsh were divided, but most kings supported Sepphoris and Magnus. In 3rd Era 127, Uriel III was captured at the Battle of Ikedag in Hammerfell. En route to his trial in the imperial city, a mob overtook his carriage and burned him alive within it. His captor and uncle continued on to the imperial city and by common acclaim was proclaimed Sepphoris I, Emperor of Tamriel. Sepphoris' reign is marked by nothing but war. By all accounts, he was a kind and intelligent man, but what Tamriel needed was a great warrior, and he was that. It took an additional 10 years of constant warfare for him to defeat his sister Potema. The so-called Wolf Queen of Solitude died in the siege of her city-state in the year 137. Sephirus only survived his sister by 3 years. Sephirus never had the time during the war years to marry, so his brother, the fourth child of Pelagius II, to assume the throne. The Emperor Magnus was elderly, and the business of punishing the traitorous kings of the War of the Red Diamond drained much of his health. Legend also accuses Magnus's son and heir Pelagius III of murder, but that seems very unlikely. For no other reason, Pelagius was king of Solitude following the death of Potema and seldom visited the imperial city. Pelagius III, sometimes called Pelagius the Mad, was proclaimed emperor in the 145th year of the Third Era. Almost from the start, his eccentricities of behavior were noted. He embarrassed dignitaries, offended his vassal kings, and on one occasion marked the end of a grand ball by attempting to hang himself. His long-suffering wife was finally awarded the regency of Tamriel, and Pelagius III was sent to a series of healers and asylums until his death in Third Era 153 at the age of 34. The Empress Regent of Tamriel was proclaimed Empress Kataraya I upon the death of her husband. Some who do not mark the end of the Septim bloodline with the death of Kintira II consider the ascendancy of this dark elf woman as the true mark. Her defenders assert that though Kataraya was not descended from Tiber, the son she had with Pelagius was, so the chain does continue. Despite the racist assertions to the contrary, Kataraya's 46th reign was one of the most glorious in Tamriel's history. Uncomfortable in the imperial city, Kataraya traveled extensively throughout the empire, such as no emperor has ever done since Tiber's day. She repaired much of the damage the broken alliances and bungled diplomacy had created. The people of Tamriel came to love their empress far more than the nobility did. Kataraya's death in a minor skirmish in Black Marsh is a favorite source for conspiracy-minded historians. The sage Montelius's discovery of a disenfranchised branch of the Septim's family's involvement with the skirmish was a revelation indeed. When Cassander assumed the throne at the death of his mother, he was already middle-aged. Only half-elven, he aged like a Breton. In fact, he had left the rule of Wayrest to his half-brother Uriel due to poor health. Nevertheless, as the only true blood relation of Pelagius, and thus Tiber, he was pressed into accepting the throne. To no one's surprise, the Emperor Cassinder's reign did not last long. In 2 years he was dead. Uriel Lariat, Cassinder's half-brother, the child of Kataraya I, and her imperial consort Lariat, left the kingdom of Wayrest to reign as Uriel IV. Legally, Uriel IV was the Septim. Cassander had adopted him into the family when he had become king of Wayrest. Nevertheless, to the council and the people of Tamriel, he was a bastard child of Kataraya. Uriel did not possess the dynamism of his mother, and his long 43 reign was one of hotbed of sedition. Next, part 3. Part the third. Hello. We're going to watch the sunset while we continue to read. The first volume of this series we already read, and the second, so we're on to the Brief History of the Empire, Part 3. It will be recalled that Uriel IV was not a Septim by birth. His mother, though she reigned as empress for many years, was a dark elf married to the true Septim emperor, Pelagius III. His father was Kataraya's I consort after Pelagius's death, and during her reign a Breton nobleman named Galavir Lariat. Before taking the throne of empire, Cassander I had ruled the kingdom of Wayrest, but his poor health had forced him to retire. Cassander had no children, so he legally adopted his half-brother Uriel and gave him the kingdom. 7 years later, Cassander inherited the empire at the death of his mother. 3 years after that, Uriel found himself the recipient of Cassander's inheritance once again. Uriel IV's reign was a difficult and long one. Despite being a legally adopted member of the Septim family, and despite the Lariat family's high position, indeed they were distant cousins of the Septims, Few of the Elder Council could be persuaded to accept him fully as a blood relation of Tiber. The council had assumed much responsibility during Catariah I's long reign and Cassinder's short reign, and a strong-willed alien monarch like Uriel IV found it impossible to hold their unswerving fealty. Time and time again, the council and emperor were at odds, and time again, the council won the battles. Since the days of Pelagius II, the Elder Council had consisted of the wealthiest men and women in the empire, and the power they wielded was ultimate. The council's last victory over Uriel IV was posthumous. Andorak, Uriel IV's son, was disinherited by vote of the council, and a cousin more closely related to the original Septim line was proclaimed Sepphoris II in 3rd Era 268. Sepphoris had been a Nordic king for the first time 9 years of Sepphoris II's reign. Those loyal to Andorak battled the imperial forces. In an act that the sage Erantine called Tiber Septim's heart beating no more, the council granted Andorak the high rock kingdom of Shornhelm at the end of the war. To end the war. Andorak's descendants still rule that land. Of course, Sepphoris II had foes that demanded more of his attention than Andorak. From out of a nightmare, in the words of Erantine, a man who called himself the Comoran usurper had led an army of Daedra and undead warriors on a rampage through Valenwood, conquering kingdom after kingdom. None could resist his onslaughts, and as month turned to bloody month, in the year 3rd Era 249, fewer even tried. Sepphoris II sent more and more mercenaries into Hammerfell to stop the usurper's northward march, but they were bribed, turned into undead, or slaughtered. The story of the Comoran usurper does deserve a book of its own. I recommend the reader find Pollux Ithri's The Fall of the Usurper for more detail. In short, the destruction of the forces of the usurper had little to do with the efforts of the emperor. The results were a great regional victory and an increase in hostility towards the seemingly inefficacious empire. I apologize. The notes from this are spelled quite incorrectly, and there are some errors, so it's not just me here. Uriel V turned opinion back towards the potential power of the empire. Turning the attention to Tamriel away from internal strife, Uriel V embarked on a series of invasions, beginning almost from the moment he took the throne in 3rd Era 268. Uriel V conquered Roscrea in 271, Cathnoque in 276, Innisli in 279, and Esroniat in 284. In 3rd Era 288, he embarked on his most ambitious enterprise, the invasion of a continent kingdom in Akavir. This was ultimately a failure, for 2 years later Uriel V was killed in Akavir on the battlefield of Ionath. Nevertheless, Uriel V holds a reputation second only to Tiber as the great warrior emperor of Tamriel. The last 4 emperors, beginning with Uriel V's infant son, are described in the 4th and final volume of the series, which we are about to go to. And now we're on the 4th book. At Uriel V's death across the sea in distant hostile Akavir, Uriel VI was but 5 years old. In fact, Uriel VI was born only shortly before his father left for Akavir. Uriel V's only other progeny, by a different woman, were the twins Morihatha and Eloisa, who had been born a month after Uriel V left. Uriel VI was coronated in the 290th year of the 3rd Era. The consort Thonica, as the boy's mother, was given a restricted regency until Uriel VI reached his minority. The council retained the real power, as they had ever since the days of Catariah I. The council so enjoyed its unlimited and unrestricted freedom to make laws and profits, Uriel VI was not given full license to rule until 307, when he was 22 years old. He had been slowly assuming positions of responsibility for years, but both the council and his mother, who enjoyed even her limited regency, were loath to give him reign. By the time he came to the throne, The mechanisms of government gave him little power, but the power to veto. This power he regularly exercised. By 313, Uriel VI could boast with conviction that he truly did rule Tamriel. He utilized defunct spy networks and guard units to bully and coerce the different members of the Elder Council. His sister was his usual ally after her marriage to Baron Ulfigerson of Winterhold brought her a considerable wealth and influence. As the sage Ugarich has said, Uriel V conquered Esranet, but Uriel VI conquered the Elder Council. When Uriel VI fell from his horse and could not be saved by the finest imperial healers, his beloved sister Morihatha took the throne. At 25 years of age, she had been described by admittedly self-serving diplomats as the most beautiful creature in Tamriel. She was certainly well-learned, vivacious, athletic, and a well-practiced politician. She brought the Archmagister of Skyrim to the Imperial City and created the second Imperial Battle Mage since the days of Tiber Septim. Morihatha finished the job her brother had begun and made the Imperial Province truly a government under the Empress. Outside the Imperial Province, however, the Empire had been slowly disintegrating. Open revolutions and civil wars had raged unchallenged since the days of her grandfather, Sephirus II. Carefully coordinating her counterattacks, Morihatha slowly took back her rebellious vassals, always avoiding overextending herself. Though Morihatha's military campaigns were remarkably successful, the council was often frustrated by her deliberate pace. One councilman, an Argonian named Thoricles Romus, interesting name, furious at her refusal to send troops to his troubled lands, is believed to be the man who hired the assassins who claimed her life in Third Era 339. Romus was tried and executed, though he protested his innocence. Morihatha had no surviving children, and Eloisa had died of fever 4 years before. Eloisa's 25-year-old son Pelagius was crowned Pelagius IV. Pelagius IV continued his aunt's work, slowly bringing back the seditious kingdoms of his empire. He had Morihatha's patience and deliberate pace in his endeavors, but alas, he did not have her success. The kingdoms had been free of constraints for so long, even a benign imperial presence was odious. Nevertheless, when Pelagius died after an astonishing 49-year reign, Tamriel was closer to unity than it had been since the days of Uriel I. Our current emperor, His Awesome and Terrible Majesty Uriel Septim VII, son of Pelagius IV, has the diligence of his great-aunt Morihatha, the political skill of his great-uncle Uriel VI, and the military prowess of his great-granduncle Uriel V. For 21 years he reigned and brought justice and order to Tamriel. In the year of Third Era 389, his imperial battle mage Jaeger Tharn betrayed him. Uriel VII was imprisoned in a dimension of Tharn's creation, and Tharn used his magic and illusion to assume the emperor's aspect. For the next 10 years, Tharn used imperial privileges, but did not continue Uriel VII's schedule of reconquest. It is not entirely known yet what Tharn's goals and personal accomplishments were during the 10 years he imitated his liege lord. In Third Era 399, a mysterious champion defeated the battle mage in the dungeons of the Imperial Palace and freed Uriel VII from his other dimensional cell. Since his release, Uriel VII has worked diligently to renew the battle to reunite Tamriel. Tharn's interference broke the momentum, but the years since then have proved that the glorious golden age of Tiber Septim may be visited upon Tamriel once again. And now we're done with those 4 long treatises, and we can go on to something a little bit less serious. Holidays of the Iliac Bay by Fabtay. An overview of Breton and Redguard holidays commonly celebrated in the Iliac Bay region. The region of the Iliac Bay has a rich history, and not surprisingly, a number of holidays unique to it because of this history. The Breton and the Redguard cultures have many similarities, but just as many distinctions. An analysis of the holidays is one way to study the people. As any school child could tell you, The Red Guards are a relatively new culture to Tamriel. Their arrival from their homeland is actually well recorded, though it occurred several thousand years ago, in the 808th year of the First Era. Hammerfell was a great desert encompassed by an almost impassable mountains, unclaimed and unwanted. Many of the holidays extant in modern Hammerfell seem to be direct translations of older Redguard festivals before the migration to Tamriel. The orgiastic seasonal celebrations seem unusual in a province with few changes in this weather from month to month. Yet on the 28th of Sun's Dawn, the Redguards of the Bantham Jungle celebrate Adoros now to relieve the wintertide lethargy. On the 1st of mid-year, the people of Abibongora celebrate Drig Rudim in honor of the sun, which no normal Redguard worships on this day. Similarly, on the 29th of Sun's Height, the festival in the desert called Fiery Night seems almost perverse in such an environment. The Kumo Elizeri on the 11th of last seed in Sentinel has been translated as a harvest Thanksgiving, though many scholars suggested that it was once a springtide holiday. Similarly, the Feast of the Tiger in the Bantha on the 14th of last seed was probably once a religious holiday to a tiger god instead of a Thanksgiving. Other old Redguard holidays have either been acknowledged as part of the old culture or adjusted to fit with the climate of Hammerfell. The Serpent's Dance, for example, of Setakalam, is patently an old festival honoring a serpent god of the homeland who evidently did not survive the journey to Hammerfell. The significance of the date, the 3rd of Sun's Dusk, has been lost with the serpent priests. Baranth Do on the 18th of Evening Star and Chila on the 24th of the same month are both New Year's festivals. Most likely they've been moved from their original dates to correspond with the notion of the year defined in Tamriel. The Bretons have been in Tamriel since before recorded history. Their holidays have remained almost unchanged since primitive times, though new holidays have been created to replace those which have lost popularity. The oldest holidays still observed in High Rock must include Waking Day, on the 18th of Morningstar, when the people of the Uarth Boroland wake the spirits of nature after the winter, very nearly in the tradition of their more reverential ancestors. Flower Day, held on the 25th of First Seed in the smaller villages of High Rock, is most likely just as old or older. The old cult of the flowers, remembered as Guardtide in Tamerlane Point, on the 1st of Rain's Hand. Daggerfall's Day of the Dead, on the 13th of Rain's Hand, suggests that an ancestor worship that marked the Breton religion of antiquity. Finally, the ancient goddess of the moon, Secunda, is remembered in the Moon Festival in Glenumbra Moors on the 8th of Sun's Dusk, just as the nights begin to grow longer. The more recently created holidays of High Rock are those like Tibidetha, Tiber's Day, celebrated every 24th of mid-year in honor of Alcair's most famous son, Tiber Septim. Likewise, Othrictide on the 5th of Sun's Dawn is held in honor of the first and most illustrious Baron of Dwinnen. In quite extreme contrast, Maruk's Day on the 9th of Second Seed is a solemn holiday, immortalizing the lessons of the equally solemn First Era prophet Maruk. My favorite of the modern Breton festivals has to be Man Pelagius, held in mock honor of the most eccentric of the Septim emperors. Pelagius was, after all, a prince of Wayrest before he became king of Solitude and then emperor of Tamriel. The Bretons like to boast that it was his time in High Rock that drove him mad. Something to be proud of. On we go to a little bit more history. The War of Betany by Fabtay, a Sentinel citizen's take on the events and outcome of the war betwixt Sentinel and Daggerfall. Could there be better proof of the natural perversity of Bretons than their conduct before, during, and after what history will remember as the War of Betany? By the most depraved of motivations, the most despicable of tactics, and the most ungentlemanly of triumphs, the kingdom of Daggerfall changed the nature of warfare in the Iliac Bay and perhaps over all Tamriel. And Sentinel, We call the recent carnage the Siege of Betany, but as the book of history is writ by the victors, let us speak instead of the War of Betany. Redguards by their nature are modest and practical people. We are not phlegmatic like the High Elves, nor cowardly like the Wood Elves in Khajiit. But what would infuriate and enrage the swaggering, vainglorious Nords and Bretons would not merit a shrug from a Redguard. Had any Breton kingdom possessed the little island of Betany, it would have been covetously guarded. Betany's trade would have been seriously restricted, its religion subjugated, its people bound by active and constant pledges and duties of vassalage. But Betany was not a Breton domain. Betany was part of the kingdom of Sentinel. King Lysandus, may the old ones continue to torment his soul for his wickedness, saw the prosperous island, which is closer to his land than to Sentinel, and his black heart turned to avarice. Through threats, lies, acts of piracy, and finally invasion, Daggerfall illegally took possession of the island of Betany. His court sorceress, the Lady Medora, his enchantress mother, and other experienced counselors were horrified by the brutality of his campaign and begged him to abandon his tyrannical act of war. Gradually, all dissenters were removed from the court. None but the ignorant and warmongers remained. Our late King Cameron tried to employ civil diplomacy with Daggerfall, but in the end he made the formal declaration of war. Daggerfall and Sentinel had fought many times in their 2,000 years of coexistence, and Cameron knew the black magic and espionage the Bretons considered honest warfare. Never debasing the Sentinel character by duplicating the Breton villainy, Cameron knew how to combat Lysandus. King Lysandus's knavish battle tactics were even more perfidious than his ancestors, and the war continued to rage until it began to involve more than Sentinel and Daggerfall. Lord Graddock, ruler of the Reich Gradkeep, acted as conciliator between Sentinel and Daggerfall and eventually convinced both monarchs to meet and make peace. The ill-fated Treaty of Gradkeep began civilly, and terms of peace were discussed, agreed upon, and set to paper. The terms were excessively generous. Cameron had agreed to give up some of his rights to Betany in order to placate the madness of Lysandus and bring peace back to the Iliac Bay. It was not until King Cameron read the treaty he was about to sign that he realized the outrageous perfidy of the Bretons. The treaty had actually purposefully miswritten by the Daggerfall scribe in a desperate and ignominious attempt to trick Cameron into signing a different contract from the one to which he had agreed. The castle of Reich Gradkeep erupted into bloodbath, and the war continued. The Battle of Cringrain Field was a tragic ending of the senseless war of attrition. The Cringrain Field is located in between the Yeorth Burrowland and the Ravanian Forest, where the armies of Sentinel and Daggerfall respectively made camp after the massacre at Reich Gradkeep. As the battle began, Daggerfall proved that she had some foul Daedric magical tricks left by blinding the Redguard army with a wall of mist. Lysandus did not have the opportunity to gloat over his cousinage for long, for the sure arm of a Sentinel archer struck him in the throat, even through the thick, swirling fog. Lysandus's son, Gothred, who had spent the battle in lugubrious relaxation, was crowned without ceremony and thereupon demanded a duel with King Cameron. Cameron was many years Gothred's senior, and though a superior warrior, was exhausted from the endless warfare the boy king had been spared. Nevertheless, as a point of honor, our king agreed to the duel. The new king of Daggerfall, by dirty trick and black magic, managed to backstab our king before the duel even began. Thus, the victor at Cringrain Field and the War of Betany was Daggerfall. Daggerfall's wickedness continued even after her inglorious victory. While the widow queen of Sentinel, Her Majesty Akarithi, mourned and tried to mend her shattered lands, Gothred demanded the Princess of Sentinel as hostage of war. To save her homeland, the Princess Obki agreed to leave Sentinel and even marry the murderer of her father. But we true Redguards of Sentinel know where her love and honor lies. The Queen of Daggerfall is the Princess of Sentinel first and foremost. There you go. Some scandal there for you. Okay, the next one. Mysticism, Unfathomable Voyage by Tetronius Lore, a description of the school of mysticism. Mysticism is the school of magic least understood by the magical community, most difficult to explain to novice mages. The spells effects commonly ascribed to the school of mysticism are as wildly disparate as Soul Trap, the creation of a cell for the victim's spirit after death, to silence, the extinction of sound. But these effects are simply that, effects. The sorcery behind them is veiled in a mystery that may go back to the oldest civilizations of Tamriel and beyond. The Psijics of the Order of the Artaeum's term for mysticism is the Old Way. The phrase becomes bogged in a semantic quagmire because the Old Way also refers to religion and customs of the Psijics, which may or may not be part of the magic of mysticism. There are few mages who devote their lives to the study of mysticism. The other schools are far more predictable and fathomable. Mysticism seems to derive its power from its conundrums and paradoxes, the act of experimentation, no matter how objectively implemented, can influence the magicka by its very existence. Thus, the mystic mage must regulate himself to finding consistent patterns in an imbroglio of energy. In the time it takes him to find a source with a consistent trigger and result, his peers researching at other schools may have researched and documented dozens of new spells and effects. The mystic mage is a patient and uncompetitive scholar. For centuries, mostly during the Second Era, scholarly journals published theory after theory about the aspects of magicka that we call mysticism. In the tradition of the Mages Guild to find answers to all things, respected researchers suggested the energy source is coming from Aetherius, or the Daedra themselves, to explain the seemingly random patterns of mysticism. Some ventured to guess that mysticism comes from the unused elements of successfully or unsuccessfully cast spells. Discussion with the Order of Artaeum after its reappearance has led some scholars to postulate that mysticism is more spiritual in nature. Either the intellect or emotion of the believer influences the energy pattern and flow. None of these explanations is truly satisfactory. For the beginning student of mysticism, it is best to simply learn the patterns distinguished in the maelstrom in the centuries past. The more patterns are found, the clearer the remaining ones become, until of course they change, and then the journey begins anew. Just a moment. Okay. Olander's Hammer by Kroll. The story of Olander's magical hammer. An instructive tale for children. The two children, Frodwig and his younger sister Sylvanda, had been exploring all morning. The noon sun was directly overhead and everything was warm and bright. They had left their Ragard village, Granitza, early that morning for a day in the wilderness, a picnic, and with a stern warning from their father to be home before dark. They crossed a huge field that was bare, save a single rose bush right in the middle. The little girl asked Frodwig about it. Well, he said, according to father, a great battle was fought in this place many years ago. The battle was visited by the god of all warriors, Raymond Ebenarm, who caused the leaders to end the battle and return to their homes. It is said that the rosebush grows where he stood that day. Oh, how exciting, giggled Sylvanda. The children continued their trek, approaching some woods. As they entered the forest, the air became very cool, and a deep quiet seemed to envelop them. What is that? Sylvanda pointed to a large hole in the ground from which protruded a long, thick pole. Around the hole, thorny plants had grown into an impenetrable wall. I don't know, said Frodwig, but let's see if we can get a closer look. Stop! They did. Looking beyond the hole, the children saw an elderly Redguard of many years. His gray beard, scraggly hair, and stooped shoulders. Just a moment. Silly, silly. There we go. Got to start the day over again. Okay. As I was saying, his gray beard, scraggly hair, and stooped shoulders certainly did not support the authoritarian command he gave, but the children stopped just the same as he approached. "Who are you?" stammered Frodwig as Sylvanda carefully tucked herself behind her brother's back. "My name is Honig Rovinger, and I live in these woods." "Why can't we examine your hole, Master Grovinger?" "Because, my dear children, it and what it holds are cursed. Now just who are you?" he stuttered, mimicking Frodwig. Finally gaining his composure, Frodwig said, "I am Frodwig Amur of the village Granitsta. This is my silver Sylvanda. We are on an outing. Can you tell us about this mysterious hole?" "Well," said the old man as he slowly settled to the ground, "why don't you sit here with me for a while and I will tell you about Olander's hammer. That's the handle of the fabled weapon sticking out from yonder chasm." With this, the children also settled into sitting positions in front of the old Redguard ranger. Grovinger began. "Many years ago, there was a huge battle fought in this very field." "Oh yes, I know," said Sylvanda, interrupting the old man. "It was ended by the warrior god Raymond Ebenorm, and a magic rosebush grows where he stood that day," she continued breathlessly. The old man sternly cleared his throat, causing the little girl again to shrink behind her brother. "Now, if I may continue without interruption. On that day the battle ended, a young Redguard soldier stopped in this spot as he was leaving to go to his home. He carried the equipment he had used on the field, which included a marvelously fashioned warhammer that had been given to him by his father. The weapon was beautifully made, and unknown to the young warrior, carried an enchantment that had protected him through the vicious battle just ended. The young man, Olander by name, rested by this very tree. Suddenly he was confronted by a wizard dressed in all black from head to toe. Without so much as a how do you do, the wizard demanded that Olander give him his hammer. Still flushed from the battle, the young man just looked at the dark man and laughed. The wizard, shaking with rage, raised his hands to cast a horrible spell against the soldier. However, the young man was quicker. The huge warhammer whistled through the air, smiting the wizard a mortal blow just as the spell left his fingers. There was a loud explosion. The children stared at the old man. He suppressed a grin and continued. Clouds of dust and smoke covered this forest clearing, and when the air settled, yon hole was there with the hammer's handle protruding from it. Olander and the wizard had vanished. The thorny vines you see grew up immediately around the hole, and to this day no one has been able to approach it close enough to remove that marvelous weapon. Many have tried and all have failed. It is said that only someone of tremendous merit can take it. All of a sudden, both children in unison stood and shouted, "Oh, look how the day had gone. We must go. If we're late getting home, our father would be most unhappy with us." As they turned to leave, Frodwig said to the old man, "Thank you, Master Grovinger, for telling us of Olander's hammer. You know, I may just come back one day and retrieve it." As they disappeared from his view, the old man said to himself, "Ah yes, Master Frodwig Almur, you might just do that. You just might do that. I can speak, really I can." So, I told you today was not going to be terribly thrilling, and I'm keeping my promise. Okay, just a few more. Now, I'm going to be skipping certain ones, but we'll talk about Special Flora of Tamrail by Hardin. A list of all the rare plants of Tamrail. It's not quite a list, it's a little bit more than that. Poppies, both black and white, can be found growing wild in the mountains of Hammerfell. Their succulent pods are often the only nourishment of adventurers who find themselves in the wilderness without rations. It is said that black and white poppies together have magical properties. When they are crushed and mixed with the milk of the agile-footed mountain goat, a potion that allows the user to glide safely above the ground can be made. Fire fern, a perennial herb native to Morrowind. The flowers are inconspicuous and often hidden. The glossy, evergreen foliage and flowers are resistant to conditions of high heat and bright light. A petal from this plant, placed under an adventurer's tongue, will provide protection from the heat and fire found in the lava pits and streams found around Dagoth-Ur. Dragon's tongue, common name for the fern-like herb found in the Black Marsh. It is especially prolific around the area of Euthor's Swamp. It is a beautiful wildflower. Its name comes from the fire-red fronds that protect its golden flower. As pretty as it is a deadly poison to most living beings and needs to be avoided by adventurers. It is said, however, that Argonians can pick the plant and use the sap derived from its roots as an enhancement to their endurance. Domica redwort is a herb grown by many residents of Valenwood for their beautiful and showy flowers. They attain a height of about 3 feet and have feathery leaves. The flowers are usually bright red. In addition to their beauty, they are said to have magical abilities to enhance the appearance of anyone who carries or wears one of the flowers. Ironwood nut. This rare nut comes from the ironwood trees which grow deep in the forests of Skyrim. The wood from these trees is as hard as the metal for which they are named. The very rare black ironwood tree is said to produce a nut which is very succulent and is believed to enhance the strength of the adventurer who is able to crack its shell. The ginkgo leaves, which are found along the banks of rivers and lakes in Hammerfell, are most inconspicuous. Only peculiar half-moon shape make it noticeable. It is very sweet and tasty. Legend has it that when mixed properly with the pulp of the aloe plant, the potion has the ability to increase one's stamina for a short while. The Somnalius Fern can be found in the swamps of Black Marsh. The fronds from this plant are light green and quite delicate. Picking a frond can be very difficult, but once retrieved, it can be used to put an enemy to sleep for a short while by passing it under his nose. Arrowroot is a thick rubber tuber that can be found in the province of Valenwood. The plant is very difficult to find as its above-ground foliage is very meager and scrawny, but the arrowroot itself can be beneficial to the gatherer as it has magical properties. The paste made from grinding the root is very tasty and can improve the user's accuracy with a bow and arrow. Nightshade is reputed to be a very poisonous herb. However, the variety found in many parts of elsewhere is cherished by the Khajiits, who have followed the career path of thievery. Many Khajiits will tuck a piece of nightshade inside their armor to increase their abilities to skulk, hide, and become invisible. And our last book for the evening is Aiz, Animal God, by Bulgasurma. I apologize, I have trouble with these Hammerfellian names or Redgar names or whatever they are. Some of them are just difficult. An explanation of the coming of Aiz the Agitated, gods of the animals. Note, this book incorrectly refers to the town of Rockpart in Black Marsh as Rock Creek. Please do not edit this. This error is intentionally copied from the game. The statues one sees throughout Valenwood and parts of Hammerfell and elsewhere that seem to be misshapen humanoid carrying a rod are of Aiz, the god of animals. The rod he carries has an origin in the tale of the ox and the evil farmer. It seems that one day an evil farmer decided to kill all of his animals and have a big party. As the story unfolds, animal after animal is killed and prepared for a big meal. Lastly, the farmer comes to the ox and prepares to slit its throat. The ox, not wishing to be anybody's dinner, prayed very vocally to Aiz. This came out as a loud moo, of course. At that very instant, Aiz appeared carrying a rather large set of balance weights. Without explanation, Aiz ate the farmer and vanished. Ever since that day, Aiz, the extremely agitated, has always been portrayed as carrying a large set of scales with him. The local Aiz worshippers have no idea why and do not seem to care. Although this story has been called fanciful at best, I personally know a raccoon who had actually talked to the ox. That is, before the ox became filler for the local inn's larder. I do not have any information one way or the other about the validity of this second myth. It is, however, quite traditional. It seems that many, many years ago, before the reign of Uriel Septim the seventh, before the reign of Sepphoris Septim II, yes, even before the age of Pelagius Septim III, long may his name be praised, there lived a wombat, who is the pet of Lady Grelina, daughter of Lord Prufrock of Rock Creek. Lady Grelina loved her wombat so, and it loved her too with all the passionate intensity a marsupial can muster. Unfortunately, it was a time of great sorrow in Rock Creek. A pestilence had come through town, destroying all their cash crops, which consisted of raspberries and a few scraggly odd weeds that caused Argonian women to look very attractive to those who partook. Then a plague had come, inflicting nearly every cobbler with chronic hiccups. Finally, a witch had cursed the townspeople, so only the words any could utter were, precisely. All the businesses, stores, and guilds fled for the town faster than an extremely fast thing. Lady Grelina saw her father despairing the loss the town was suffering, so she brought her wombat in and told him, "Father, my wombat can save us all, for it is sacred to the god Aius, god of animals. The only reason I didn't tell you earlier is because I am an early adolescent going through that period when I don't like to communicate. But please ask a wish of my wombat and Aius will fulfill it, for my wombat loves me." The king thought this was fairly flaky, but he had nothing to lose, so he uttered a modest wish to the wombat. "All I want is for one business to come back to Rock Creek that will never leave, no matter the calamity." I probably should have mentioned before that the king had always been cruel to the wombat. He used to lick it and try to make it stick to the wall. So the wombat had Aius create an equipment store in front of the palace gate that would never go away. The royal family ended up going mad and eating one another. Ironically, the wombat was one of the first to go. But that is why there is, to this day, an equipment store blocking the palace gate in Rock Creek. If you don't believe me, go there and see. And I believe that is the end of this evening's lore stream. But we will be back next week, and when I return, we are going to tackle some of the longest pieces, which include King Edward's series and Fool's Ebony. We'll probably start with Fool's Ebony because it is a play. And I will see you all then, and thank you for joining me. Mwah. Oh, Kit Kavash, totally unrelated. You won the thing today. You won the raffle today. I need to know your server and username. So thanks for stopping by, because you are the champion, my friend. Sorry about that. And I will catch you all next week. Let me see. Just message me in game, Kikavash. I will talk to you all later. PCEU the Imperfect. You got it. Thank you.